Hello, everybody. Welcome to CW Live or CW Podcast, whichever way you choosing to watch us or listen to us. We're very much delighted to have you with us. I'm also delighted to have with me Terry Pullinger, our Deputy General Secretary Postal. Evening, Terry.
Evening, Chris. You all right?
Yeah, fantastic, man. I know you've been busy and you've been flying around. And you've only just jumped off the train yourself, so great to really pleased and grateful that you're with us, mate. The subject, we're going to cut right to it, is average holiday pay in Royal Mail Group. Just to say, and we can already see, lots of you asking your questions and getting your comments. And just to say, what we're going to do, we're not going to be able to say, answer my specific question tonight on my hours here and there, but we guarantee, and I mean, Terry, and this union well enough now that we won't be dodging anything, but we probably might group your questions together and might make them into different areas. But we'll make sure that everything that you've been putting across in the last few weeks on our pages will be answered and put to Terry tonight. But before I get into your questions, I'm going to give you, Terry, if it's okay, a chance to give a little bit of background where you think we are with this issue and update our members. Over to you, Terry.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an historical agreement and it's a very complex and difficult subject to deal with, which is why we've been trying to get an agreement on it since 2014. It's not an easy subject. And listen, I absolutely understand, and this is always the case, and we anticipated this. When you have to design a structure, it's not necessarily going to please everyone. It's not necessarily, and when does any agreement absolutely appease everyone? But obviously we've been, our focus was on addressing the union's policy and the real key issues that have been debated time and time again at conference since 2014. So I just wanted to give it from context. I understand why some people, would not be happy, and I've seen some of the questions, and we will talk about them, of course. But in terms of the context, I just want people to understand that this legislation, it's European legislation, and I think we need to keep one eye on that as well, by the way, after Brexit, whether these things will still hold the field going forward. But this came out of European legislation in 2014. And I think in all honesty, initially it was relating to the growing gig economy, bogus self-employed. These were people that wasn't getting any holiday pay, any sick pay, any of the other benefits that a normal employee gets. And this legislation was drafted. And what they said is when calculating these people's holiday pay, it should also include guaranteed overtime. Now, there's a key word there, guaranteed overtime, not ad hoc. Now, of course, we do have guaranteed overtime, and we have it in the form of scheduled attendance. So this union moved and negotiated and achieved, after a period of time, and still took some time with the employer, achieved that SAs would be paid on annual leave. So clearly the real game up front is to make sure people are on the right contracted hours, and wherever there is a regular commitment, you get it on SA, because that's paid on annual leave, and then you don't, this agreement in effect is a backup to that. But what happened then, I think around about 2016, it shifted to say regular overtime. So the battle that's gone on legally, which a lot of people, I see people writing assuming that they know the legality of all of this, and I can assure everyone our negotiations, we've had lawyers wrap around us on both sides. And the big issue, and maybe it's the issue industry uses to try and avoid having a commitment to average holiday pay, is the issue of what's regular. And any settlements on that have all been different. So our initial position was, let's see what case study produces to see what sort of deal we can do, because obviously our members do already have lots of benefit, and this comes at a cost to the business. So case study was it never developed in a definitive way in the issue of what is regular. So we had to push and get an agreement and make a definition of what would be regular for us. And where we landed, and Unite, the union, on behalf of managers, don't forget, push the issue in a way, because they got an agreement and they got a definition of what was regular. And we landed on the definition that in our industry, and the figures on how much overtime is available stand up to this, is that if you do 8 hours a month, so some people have said, which is concerning, don't really even know what the agreement is saying. given the amount of information we put out. I'll touch on that a bit later. But we landed on the fact that 8 hours a month, so in a 5-week month, it's less than 2 hours a week, qualifies you for that 6-month period. We broke it down into 6 months, and people have got to do 8 hours a month. Now, in terms of back pay, I absolutely know that people didn't know what the criteria was or whatever. But people certainly going forward, and we can have the discussion about back pay, certainly going forward, everyone knows. And if there's someone who does a lot of overtime, because if you don't, it really don't mean a lot. Because if you just did 8 hours for each of the 6 months, that's all you did, yes, you'd qualify. And I think we worked it out, you'd get something like 50 quid, 48 quid in average holiday pay. It wouldn't even buy your first meal on holiday. So for the people that are doing substantial ad hoc overtime, then they know they've got to do 8 hours a month. And once they do, all their overtime will be then used to calculate all the overtime up to 8 hours and beyond to calculate what lump sum they would get in the first instance. The big driver for the trade union, and I've seen some people try to interpret this as us only representing part-timers. The big driver for the union was, of course, in every debate at conference, was the fact that our part-timers were getting abused. Management had adopted a policy at that time of the only way into Royal Mail was via something like a 25-hour contract. And whilst people were employed on that, they were hugely expected and in some case even felt bullied into working extra hours. And yet when they went on leave, their pay fell through the floor. So that was the driving factor, and it has certainly addressed that issue, Chris. So it's put that into context. But maybe it'd be helpful for everyone if we started to deal with some of the questions. Maybe that would be a better way.
Yeah, and I can see so lots of appreciation for the context you're giving there from the members. Also lots of questions as well. So let's just fire straight into them. And a reminder to members that, won't be picking out saying, here's my screenshot of I missed out by this minute, that minute or whatever. But I will promise you we won't be dodging anything. We're just going to try and group them so Terry can give you the most qualified answers possible. And the first one, Terry, this is a generic one, is around the formula. A lot of members here tonight are raising this and saying, is it fair? Have the union made a mistake? Should it just been a simple average over a much wider period of time? Is it the right thing to have picked this 6-month reference period?
Well, obviously we believe it is, and so does the union, because I don't just make an agreement and throw it out there or lead the negotiations. There's been a lot of people involved in this, a lot of legal people. In fact, on the legal side, they've been very complimentary about our agreement, and it will stand the test of time. In our industry, so each settlement elsewhere in court is based on industry. Not many of them have gone back 2 years like we have. But in our industry, to say 8 hours a month, 2 hours a week, and in some months less than 2 hours a week, is, I believe, reasonably achievable with the amount of overtime that we've got. And when you look at the numbers and the amount of overtime people were doing, what you've I suppose what you've got to be savvy about is the fact that there is now a formula which says you've got to have at least 8 hours a month to qualify, and people may have to take account of that and think about it when they're doing their overtime. I think there's some fair points been raised, Chris. There is some duty patterns that we've got that may encourage people to do overtime in a different way from most people, i.e. a 1 week off in 6, that type of issue. And that will, we're prepared to look into that, and we'll be talking about that with the employer. But it begs lots of questions, really. But you asked whether we think the formula is fair. Yes, we do, and no disrespect to Unite, but our formula is easier to achieve than the formula that Unite, who went before us, managed to achieve. So in that context, I absolutely believe going forward. So the back pay issue is I think probably the biggest challenging conversation. But going forward, I absolutely believe this works for our people.
Thanks, Terry. I mean, as an aside, and your point you just made there about Unite, I was on the workplace forum that Royal Mail hosted, and there was a group of managers complaining about the quality of the CW agreement versus theirs. So you they weren't pleased with what they'd achieved, and they were making the point that we'd achieve more. You touched on the Wallington issue, Terry, and the point you made was like, we're reflecting on that, and we'll be making representations to the business. Another sort of area that's come out reasonably regularly, and I can see it in the comments again tonight, has been managers basically recording overtime wrong. So we've had lots and lots of our members saying that their manager has put it down as scheduled attendance instead of overtime because that looks better in terms of their budgets. Or we've had members saying, I did my overtime in that month, but a mistake from the manager meant that I got paid it the next month. So like, on the issue of like the review, I suppose, or ongoing discussions with Royal Mail, I can see from the comments here, it's not an insignificant amount of people who are saying, like, through no fault of my own, through misrecording from management, I'm missing out here. What would you say to those people?
Well, Chris, it's difficult, isn't it? You've got to be honest about these things, and we can blame management, and I think there is some genuine grievances are being raised, and we will look at them. We will. We're straight old goers here. We will do that, but this agreement's going to drive behaviours, because I've got to say to you, you take a Waddings. If someone is doing overtime on their week off every 6 weeks, and I think there's a bit of an issue there, because that means people, everywhere I go, people are saying they're fatigued. That means they're working 6 days a week, and then they're coming in on the week that's meant to be the recovery week as well. Now, I know we've all been there. We know that's how people, they got to put food on the table, pay bills, etc., etc. We've got to look at that sort of stuff going forward. My issue is this. If that's been regular, then why hasn't that been made into an SA? And they would have been getting it on their leave for the last 3 or 4 years. So, this is, we have got agreements that have been made by this union that should have addressed those issues. And they are issues that would have been quite proper to disagreements, and including our part-timers. Now, we know we had a mass issue in the part-timers. When we were balloting, full well there was that anger about part-timers that were being abused over their hours. And we've got agreements that ensure that if a part-timer's doing that constantly, they can either have a variation of contract, they can have it changed into a permanent increase in their contract, or it could be an SA, which means they would be getting all of that on annual leave. So this agreement is very much a backup, which should also drive the right behaviours. So if we're being honest about it, there will be some of those things, and some of the practices some of the managers have been doing out there, and it's part of the culture stuff. We're trying to unravel that, but we're talking about an organisation here of our members, 100, anything up to 120 or whatever it is, 1,000 people. So, in terms of wading through all the different complications and the different arrangements, etc., when you go nap on an agreement, it's not surprising. It draws out things that we either didn't know about, or, it draws things out of the woodwork. So, no apologies for that. And I understand, I'm totally understand why someone would say this is unfair. No one knew what the formula would be if we went back 2 years. But if people had been doing the levels of overtime or their levels of increased contract in a part-timer's point of view, then this agreement should have picked most of that up. And there may well be some grievances, but let me tell you this, Chris, it can't be that wrong, because over 50,000 of our members have received a back pay payment. Over 50,000 of, I'm saying, circa 120,000 of people, our members. We only had 7,000 claims going to tribunal. And we had to really put some work into that, or our branches did, to get those in, to put pressure on Royal Mail to do an agreement. So the noise we had in terms of trying to move this forward and get an agreement is totally disproportionate to the noise we're having now, because let's be honest, it's about pound notes. It's about being paid out. It's about someone working alongside someone else who's had a payment or hasn't got a payment, or they've had a payment bigger than you, etc., etc. Now, we anticipated that, and unfortunately, that goes with the territory, and we've got to take that on the chin. But just let's everyone be honest. Individuals, you have your strong feelings, you're totally entitled to them. As a trade union, as a membership, as a representatives, as debates at conference, the policies we've set, we had 7,000 people put tribunals in. The ones that were getting settled out of court were only going back 12 weeks, Chris. And they had to be submitted 3 months after within 3 months of the person taking leave. And then they were only looking back 12 weeks. So these people are saying you can just take 52 weeks and do an average of it, etc. That's just not reality in the settlements, or the legal settlements that are being achieved. And we take all of that into account, and we've come up with the measure we've come up with. Now, when we made the agreement, it not only did it, obviously it went to the executive. Obviously, we then briefed all of our senior field officials and branch secretaries. We put out an LTB. We put out a reps brief. So that would have gone to every single rep about the formula, how the agreement works. We put out a Q&A from the questions that were coming in, and then it went to ballot in our democratic process, and it was unanimously accepted. So the anomalies that are being exposed and where they're genuine grievance, we're looking at them, but you couldn't possibly have understood every minutiae of what's going on out there. And if a manager has been deliberately delaying overtime and not, well, where's the disagreement been then? Why don't we know about it? If a manager's been deliberately not allowing overtime, I'll tell you one thing this agreement does. It strengthens that position now. Now there's a definition of regular. I think that strengthens the ability for us to negotiate SAs, hours that either should be contractual in terms of increasing someone's contract, or it should be an SA, because we've now got a definition of regular. How can someone argue, a local manager argue, and we're pushing the responsibility down for those deals to be done locally. If there's a regular commitment, and we've now got a definition of regular, then that will justify those hours either turning into, like I say, an increased contract or into an SA. Then you don't even need this agreement, because those things are then paid on your annual leave.
Thanks, Terry. That's spot on. I think that point you made there around the settlements that were happening, only going back 12 weeks, is so critical for members to hear and listen to, particularly when they're saying, why wasn't it averaged over a year, 2 years, 3 years? That it just isn't what was happening. One of the good things you touched on there as well was that I've seen a question from Peter that's just come up here, was around the 7,000 people that submitted the tribunal claims. And Peter's saying, as are a number of people, that when you put the call out, he and many others got behind the union, submitted the claim, and people who didn't do that have got money, and he's still waiting. He isn't getting replies from headquarters. He's been emailing in, hasn't heard anything, expected to be paid this week, hasn't been. What would you say to the group of members who backed the union from the start on this subject, as per our call, who still haven't received their money? Is it a bear with us? Is it we'll get there? What is the message to that group of workers, Terry?
Well, the first message is thank you, because without that is the pressure that created that got us to the point where we could negotiate an agreement. So there's no question about that. There is something that we've got to be honest about as well. There has been a delay in processing them. So we just put out a letter to branches, Chris, yesterday or the day before. I think it might have been yesterday. Days are flying by, explaining the fact that there's been a delay. So those people are still not out the loop. They're still there. So their payment would have been delayed because there's been a delay in processing. Those people have sent their claims in. And quite frankly, that's not been good enough on our part. And I apologise for that. But we're getting our act together. And crucially, the employer knows they're still going to have to pay up for those people who meet the criteria on those claims. I think there was something like 3,000 that went through and got processed. I think we had to send out a second letter to some people, and we've had about 2,000 and something back. And we've still got another tranche of people, some in the region of 700 or whatever it is, that are going to get a third letter because they haven't responded. Now, there is an issue with this, and it takes us right back to our policy right at the very start. Our policy at the start, while we was waiting for case study, was that if people were taking out their legal claims, which they're quite entitled to do so, then that wasn't supported by the trade union. We were supporting the ones that were going in, and there's no guarantees on what any would have been, but we were supporting those people in and encouraging it to lodge claims because we wanted this agreement. We wanted an agreement. But so those that have thanks first for doing it. I'm sorry if you haven't had a response and you're part of the backlog that we're trying to clear. That is our fault, and I'll take responsibility for that. So I'll take that on the chin, whatever the reasons are. I'll take that on the chin. But you're still in the game, people. You'll still get paid. If you meet the criteria, you will still get paid. It's just you're going to be paid at a later date. So yes, Chris, we're dealing with it, but we've had some problems.
Thank you, Terry. Brilliant, mate. One more question that's come in from Sarah, and then I'm going to move on to the future, if you like. You know, in terms of the stuff you were talking about, everyone now knowing where we are. Sarah is saying, and I guess I'm just asking this question, Terry, because she represents quite a few members I can see on the page here who are posting their screenshots of their, you know, their stats from the app of how many hours they've done and whatnot. And Sarah says, you know, she notes what you said. If you only done 8 hours over the 6 weeks, you get your 48 quid. But she's saying, I'm working next to someone that's got that 48 quid, just a minimum. And I've done over 100 hours a month for 5 months. And then in month 6, was sick with COVID and haven't received a penny. So I've done 500 hours, got nothing. And someone's done 30 or 40 hours and got a payment. And I mean, I'm not asking you to say I'm going to get you that money, Sarah, but like, you know, is this part of the stuff you're talking about, how we need to think about, factor these things in going forward?
Yeah, it's difficult because you have to have a formula. You can't, and sometimes that, I suppose, that formula will challenge what people think is fair. We're really trying to do what's fair for people. We really are, and this is about people that you know are doing a lot of overtime. But I'll get back to the point. It was predominantly about the amount of part-time workers who always seem to say we only represent full-time workers, but part-time workers who weren't getting a proper contract, wanted more hours, weren't being given more hours, were being pushed to do more hours, and that wasn't getting reflected in their annual leave. So a lot of them weren't even taking leave. So you know, it is. I think it is a fair agreement. What I understand is you could have something like that where you go sick. Well, the argument would be, well, then that doesn't meet the regular criteria. You know, what is regular? Our definition of what is regular is if you're doing 8 hours a month. That's where we've landed, and the vast majority of times that should protect people. But my point is this, and I'll come back to it, Chris. This isn't the premium protection. The premium protection is us getting far more savvy right throughout the union on people and challenging when people are not on the right contracts or people are doing regular overtime, which should be an SA. And we've got a definition of regular now. If you're doing SA, then you will get that on annual leave. But I mean, you don't get your SA when you're off sick, do you? So you know, there is that line, and there'll always be a story. Well, I did 5 months, but there's other people who only did 2 months, and saying, well, I did a lot of overtime for 2 months, and I should have got that. And then there's 3 months, and there's so many, you know, variations you can have, and there's some extreme ones, and there is some extreme ones that we're looking at. But I tell you, the legal people have said to us, in all honesty, had we gone to court, it's only for 4 weeks, don't forget, whereas an SA is paid on all your leave. But so there's another inducement as to why we should change things to SA. But for full-timers, it's for 4 weeks. For part-timers, it's for all of their leave. We'd have never got that in a courtroom. We never got the maternity leave and the parental stuff that we've got in there. We'd have never got that. There's some key achievements here for the union. And, you know, I'm sorry how some people feel about it, but I do believe this is predominantly about the back pay. What we did on the back pay, the last thing that was agreed was going back 2 years. And even people in the union, if activists, and I'd like to hear a few more of them standing up and being honest about the challenge we've had here. But in terms of getting 2 years, most people didn't believe we had a chance in hell of getting 2 years, despite what people say about, it should go back 8 years, and no chance. So it was the last thing we agreed. We pushed and pushed, and we managed to get the 2 years. And we broke the 2 years down into 4 sections, so that everyone got a decent chance of getting a payment. And some people, and I've had messages from people complaining about one period, and I've asked them about another period, and yes, they had a payment for that other period. So I understand people wanting to get more and more. I understand how some people feel as though they've missed out. We're looking at these things. It's a consequence of the agreement that we've made. But going forward, absolutely, this agreement is going to stand us in good stead. There's no question about it. Once people know how it works, they'll be covered. But more importantly, this has got to be the driver for us challenging in the workplace where hours should be on a contractual basis, whether it's duty or SA, because in them circumstances, you don't need this agreement.
Thanks, Terry. Spot on. If I can now, just two more questions, and I'm going to try and move to the future. So hopefully there, everyone, you can see that we've put every question to Terry possible, whilst trying to group them together. I can see hundreds of questions and, individual things. And hopefully, I think mass majority of them, you'll find a thread in Terry's answer that's picked up your particular question. One of the things I wanted to ask you is going forward, Terry. I mean, you made a point just a moment ago about how the agreement was endorsed overwhelmingly by our branches. I have seen, and then you've made a subsequent point just now saying, because we want the activists out there talking about this being a positive achievement for the union. In fact, we've got it back paid 2 years, etc. One of the things I've seen a couple of branches actually saying now, including one today which popped up on our timeline, was we back the agreement, but we might go to conference and ask for the formula to be reviewed, and a few different ideas out there. I mean, going forward, I think you made the point really effectively. Everyone knows now. There is a bit of a question mark about going back, because people go, well, I didn't know. But going forward, everyone knows what the game is, if you like. Is that up for review in your eyes, or are you saying, well, look, this is the agreement, we've reached it, we think it's quality, everyone now should understand it going forward, let's move on?
Yeah, I mean, it's like every agreement, Chris. Will people? We have a conference. Will people set new policy? I'm pretty sure they will. But what the debate will be, this is only one agreement. Within a blink of an eye now, we're going to be negotiating. We've got another pay deal to do in April. We want more hours off the shorter working week. We want this. We want this. This is a substantial commitment from Royal Mail in terms of having to weigh out 50,000 people, 7,000 tribunal cases. 50,000 people owe them at least. We say about thanking the 7,000. They need to thank them. I don't hear people coming on saying thanks. I don't hear anyone saying that. The only feedback we get, of course, is if people miss out. So you can change the formula. You can say that we've been had over, or we've got it all wrong legally. You can say all that, but this hasn't been done on the back of a fag packet. This has been years of negotiation, and the position we've got on ad hoc overtime. That's all this deals with, ad hoc overtime. The position we've got on that is massively enhanced from what was being offered by the employer. No employer wants to do this. It's not just horrible Royal Mail. No employers, an employer that already pays holiday pay, sick pay, everything else, they don't want to do this. See, years ago, let me tell you a bit of history. Years ago, we used to have a thing called improved holiday pay. And that was because you didn't get your allowances when you went on holiday. So they would add all your allowances when there was night work and all that stuff. And you would get a lump when you went on holiday. Now, everyone got different amount because they did different shifts, they had different allowances. You'd still have to rouse locally. Well, why do they get so much when we go on holiday, etc.? You'd still get that. But the union negotiated that into base pay. So there used to be an arrangement before European holiday that gave you some sort of average of pay, but it was negotiated into our base pay. Then, of course, the European legislation and the union moved swiftly and got SAs because it's guaranteed overtime. And that's what the original European directive was about. And we got that. So there's been vehicles to get your money when you're on holiday without this agreement. This is washing up a massive problem. I think it will drive the right behaviours by the business in terms of the way they've treated part-timers, which has been a bugbear of us all the way through the dispute years. I think this agreement nails that. It nails what's regular, so it gives negotiators a great argument to create SAs or contracts. And if you do that, then you haven't got to worry about what you get when you're on annual leave, because you would get those payments. This is about ad hoc overtime, and it's about this. It's the definition of what is regular. And no case has defined that definition. So the only way to do it is make an agreement, and you have to go nap on the definition. And that's what we've done, based on the amount of overtime that's performed, based on the amount of extra hours part-timers have done. We've got a definition which we believe most people who need this protection going forward because there's not got an SA or it's not contractual will gain out of this agreement. The big issue, which I think is causing the most concern, Chris, is the back pay for obvious reasons. And everyone, we could have said, I don't know, well, they wouldn't have agreed it, but if we'd have said, right, everyone gets 200 quid, you'd have had people saying that's unfair because so-and-so ain't done any overtime. How come they got 200 quid? It's one of those. It's one of those where you're not going to please everybody. It's one of those where there will be some extreme cases, and we're happy to look at them. And I've already said to the employer where there's ones that are blatantly either unfair or outside of what the consideration was of the agreement. We'll look at it. But by and large, 50,000 people, this is a massive commitment, and going forward it's going to be a massive commitment, and it only becomes a suite of agreements, right, that enhance our terms and conditions. So pensions, pay, holiday pay, sick pay, everything is in the pot when we're negotiating our suite of agreements. And this isn't one on its own. It don't sit outside of that. There is only so much liquid in the pot, guys, and we can ask for more and more and more all the time. We believe the test of this, of course there'll be a test, Chris, and that's what might drive other policy. There will be a test of how it works going forward, but let's not use what's going on about back pay when people didn't know what the formula was as a reason for saying this formula is unworkable. And any branch coming with a policy on that, I've got to tell you, better make sure their house is in order in terms of them getting people on the right contracts and getting SAs for their people, which ensures they get their money on annual leave.
Thanks, Terry. I want to move to the final question, and then after this one, I'll give you a chance to sum up. But this is obviously, you've pointed out, a huge settlement in terms of finance for the business. It's also the opportunity for our part-time members to get some recognition for the hours they've been doing above and beyond their contractual hours. Adam actually has commented. I saw him commenting earlier on the stream. He's commented again. He has said thank you. So there's a thank you for you, Terry, and for the union. But Adam's saying thank you, and I'm looking at his little screenshot he sent, and he's got a 18-hour contract, and he's been doing hundreds of hours a month, and he's got a very sizable payout. But part of me is thinking, like, this shouldn't be Adam's acknowledgement from the company. What should be his acknowledgement for doing 35 hours a week for 5 years should be a 35-hour contract. Out of all this, Terry, you just made the point there about the branches and stuff. Out of all this, is there now like that? This is like a needs must situation. We got to go out there and where these things are so extreme, we got to get people proper contracts. Is that on your agenda, and is that one of your priorities? I know, Mark, just before I finish it, I know our officers, the other postal officers, are on this case as well as yourself. Yeah,
I mean, the thing is, Chris, we went through 4 or 5 huge, dispute years, real proper. We're talking about dispute years, and everyone knows that. Everyone who's on listening to this. And supported this trade union, fantastic. But we did that to get us into a place to achieve our vision for the future of this industry. Reinvent Royal Mail for the next generation. That's absolutely the message that we're on. But in order to do that, we also then had to go through clearing the decks on stuff that's been there, for 4 or 5 years because we was in dispute. And everyone knows that. And that was, achieving our shorter working week. And none of these things are lost. Now, when we say not everyone's happy with every agreement, the amount of people who complain about that, there'll be people who don't like the pension arrangements we've done. You just can't possibly please everyone. But listen, that's part of leadership, isn't it? And you have to take it on the chin. And I do. I genuinely believe we constantly, and this union has constantly over the years, advanced the benefits for our members. And this is another agreement to add to that suite of things. And to be honest, I don't want people getting loads and loads of money out of this. I would rather people run the right contracts. I would rather where regular overtime's justified, it was turned into an SA. And it takes away that debate. It takes away your need to do 8 hours and everything else. It doesn't matter then. You get it when you're on annual leave. This is to try and pick up if there's loads and loads of ad hoc. Now, we've just gone through massive revision activity and still going through it. Hopefully, a lot of the part-timers, we sent out a resourcing agreement, which put them top of the list to make sure they had their hours increased where that was possible to do up to full time. So, you know, I hope all of that's been picked up in those revisions. And a lot of these contractual anomalies, which has really drove the passion behind us needing to get this agreement, I hope a lot of them have been addressed. Going forward, Chris, my vision for us, for postal workers, I want the maximum a postal worker should be on is a 4-day week. We're going to have to cover 24/7. You've seen our agreement. No one wants to have that conversation, but we're going to. I think the future should be 3- and 4-day weeks. The job of a postal delivery person is harder than it's ever been. And wherever I go, people are telling me that, you know, they're fatigued and they're shattered and everything else. And we've got to do our best to try and ensure on a daily basis we can try and ease some of that, because I see it and everyone does, and I know Mark does as well. But what we've also got to do is this, you know, not being a place where we're encouraging people to work 6 days a week every week. That takes us back to the 70s when this union was arguing for a 5-day week. So, you know, we've got to get the balance right. We want that 35-hour week. We want better duty patterns. We want more recovery time for people. We don't want to stop people doing overtime. But if there's a regular commitment that they're then going to pick up, even on those type of inventive duties, then it should be on SA if it's regular. It shouldn't be left to this agreement to sort out. So I hope going forward there isn't loads and loads of payments, because what I'd rather see is where it's necessary people do get, you know, properly reimbursed, but I'd rather see that it was all contractual and that people got it on their annual leave regardless of whether they've done 2 hours or 8 hours.
Thanks, Terry. Really positive challenge there to our branches and representatives, particularly as you've made the point, and Mark Boach made the point when we spoke to him last, that we're going through so many revisions. Those opportunities are there. Terry, the final opportunity for you to get any closing messages over to our members.
Well, you know, just to say, everyone's entitled to their opinion. They absolutely are. This has gone through a rigorous process and through our democracy. The agreement itself ain't been given a chance yet, has it? Because the real debate going on here is about back pay, and people that are aggrieved that they should have had more, and that the formula has in some way, for some reason, worked against them. Then that will always happen going forward. But if you know you haven't done them 8 hours a month, then you know you're not going to qualify. But if you do those 8 hours, so if you've got 2 weeks leave during those 8 hours, that month, and you'll know when the periods are, we're going to tell people when the periods are, then you know before you go on that leave, if you want to make sure you qualify for all the overtime you're going to be doing or have done, ad hoc overtime, then get your 8 hours in, because everything suggests the hourage is there. Certainly what the number of hours that are being worked and the people that are doing the amount of overtime in respect to the amount of people that are coming in complaining because they've done so much overtime over a 6-month period but not met the criteria. So the hours are there. So people have got to get a bit savvy about that. But for reps and for everyone else, this gives us the foundation to challenge, as I say, to get the right contracts and the right SAs in place, and then that isn't a problem. Where that don't happen and there is genuine ad hoc and people are doing it, if you do 8 hours a month, you will get the average paid, you know, at the moment in 2 lump sums. But eventually, Royal Mail haven't even got the IT for it at the moment. That's how, you know, we pushed and got this agreement through. Then it will be paid when people do go on their leave. We've got a lot of people who don't take leave, but you know, that's neither here nor there. So it's another part of the suite of agreements that we've got that protect our people. It addresses an issue that's been policy now since 2014. You have to go NAP on a formula, and that's what we've gone. There is a review in the agreement, so we'll be able to judge going forward. But I totally understand people are entitled to their opinion. I totally understand someone who feels they've missed out because they didn't know the formula, but they've still done regular overtime, etc. in their opinion. But you do a deal, you have to go NAP on it, and that's what we've done. And it is a good agreement going forward. And the fact that 50,000 people against the backdrop of 7,000 claims, 50,000 people have already benefited. They've already had some sort of payment of a consequence of what we've done. We pushed 2 years to limit and we achieved it, and we've tried to maximise the opportunity for everyone to get something out of it. genuine thing. And it's been, as you say, Chris, it's been through our rigorous process. It was massively supported. I am concerned that despite all the information we sent out and question and answers, Chris, which cover some of the things you've raised today that went out before the agreement was voted on, some people have definitely expressed views that they didn't know that. Now, either this stuff never got reported to our members, never got pinned up in the workplace. As I say, we sent out a reps brief. Maybe we'll have to do it again. But, we are where we are. And like I say, people are entitled to their view, but the majority of branches definitely felt this was a step in the right direction. The proof will be in the eating, but I'm absolutely convinced this will benefit our people and drive the right behaviours.
Thank you, Terry. That's fantastic. Thank you for your time and joining us tonight. I know you rushed out of meetings to be here for the 7 o'clock kickoff, so we really do appreciate that, mate. And we also appreciate, both Terry and myself, all the members coming on and flooding on tonight, and all of your questions, whether they're challenging, whether they're positive, we welcome them all, because that's the type of union they are, and that's the transparency that we want to, have between us and the membership. So thank you to all of you. Whether you've listened on the podcast, watched it on our Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, or if you're looking at it on the app, thank you so much for joining us. Another plug, if you could download the app, you'd join 15,000 CW members who have now done so. It's really going well for us, so please consider doing that. Whilst I've got Terry here as well, to say in the coming weeks we'll have him back discussing wider issues, because aside from average holiday pay, there is so much going on in our industry, and Terry's touched on some of those things, so there'll be more comms coming in the coming weeks and months. But from Terry and myself tonight, that's everything. Good night and take care, everybody.